train AI models and all that, you need computers, actual physical computers. Now, these might exist in cloud servers and all that, but even a server is an actual computer sitting somewhere in a data center. So that kind of infrastructure is also very necessary, the compute aspect of it. And then you also need the data aspect of it. There needs to be data which is used to train these particular models, the data which you feed into this compute, so that you can keep on fine-tuning and optimizing your models so they can chunk out. And then very importantly also is really the human resource, in terms of human resource, mostly in terms of the knowledge resources, because AI is a fundamentally it's a knowledge-based field, I'd say. Can we have our own localized, I think it's called Luganda GPT. Yeah. Can we have our own localized version of that? Because it, like you mentioned really rightly, language is the entry point for a lot of people.
This is the Policy Digest, a Center for Policy Analysis podcast that explores how African societies are governed and how people and their leaders are shaping the future of their communities. Through candid conversations and insightful analysis, we aim to provide a deeper understanding of the political, economic, and social landscape of Africa. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the diverse and dynamic world of African governance.
So Jerry, just to start us off, could you try and give us a picture of the current state of artificial intelligence in Africa, whether there are any success stories or which African countries are leading the way and how they're doing it?
Yeah. Artificial intelligence in Africa is still a broadly young or virgin field. The number of countries which I think taking a lot of stride in it, and I think the most notable ones I'll say is Kenya, Nigeria, and a bit of South Africa also. And that's really where we're seeing a lot of the work, especially, or the new applications of AI is really coming from. Most notably, I'd say a lot of models like ChatGPT and all need actually humans to try and check them, especially when they're training. A lot of that training is actually outsourced to countries like Kenya, where people actually look at some of the outputs of this model and classify them whether this is good or this is bad. So those seem to be the countries which are currently taking lead in the AI field on the African continent. And I think the main reason why I believe that is because of the infrastructure that they've put in place. Look at Kenya, for example. It has really positioned itself as the Silicon Savannah, or really the Silicon Valley of the African continent. And that's what they're looking at. The tech ecosystem there is really large. It's really very developed. And there's a lot of penetration, especially of the internet and really mobile phones throughout the country, which is really a similar case to markets such as Nigeria, and obviously South Africa is much more developed. So those seem to be where the markets where a lot of AI activity is currently taking place. And we are seeing mostly the AI in Africa seems to be mostly from the application kind of side, where you have a number of startups trying to implement these AI models into the various tools and products they're offering, and then also a number of research organizations which are also trying to put out a bit of research into these particular fields and to really contribute to the knowledge pot of AI. In Uganda, there's also been a bit of that. I think the most notable one I'll say is I think Makerere University has an artificial intelligence lab, and a number of other players really. I think there's a few AI companies here and there which are really trying to also do a number of things. So these are mostly things such as to bring them to really more of our applications. You look at applications such as trying to diagnose crop diseases using images via phones, like trying to diagnose if a crop has one disease or another. We see a lot of drone technology being used in countries such as Rwanda, I think, with companies like Zipline, which have tried to deploy a lot of that, and a lot of other players who are also trying to build localized versions of AI tools to really see how we're able to also adapt this. But I'd really say it really moves hand in hand with how far developed the technology ecosystem of our country is. And that is why we really see the same countries which are...
Could you just help us break that down? If we were to, let's say, define it at face value, theoretically, what does a technology ecosystem have? and where are countries lacking in building that kind of ecosystem?
The key AI, a lot of AI exists on computers and eventually comes in the real world, but fundamentally it's on a computer. So what are computers? Computers essentially are essentially tools which allow us to access the internet. And what is the internet? That is really infrastructure. To me, I think that is the key backbone to where all this can begin. The infrastructures in the country which allow people to access the internet is very critical to any kind of AI. So look at these countries like Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, the ones I've mentioned. These are countries which really have a very good internet penetration throughout the population. So as you have internet really highly penetrated, highly used throughout the country, what that does is people are able to access resources and tools via online, and these are the tools which they eventually use for building all these AI models and all that. Then secondly, after infrastructure, which I really believe the internet is a key to it, you also have infrastructure in terms of to train AI models and all that, you need computers, actual physical computers. Now, these might exist in cloud servers and all that, but even a server is an actual computer sitting somewhere in a data center. So that kind of infrastructure is also very necessary, the compute aspect of it. And then you also need the data aspect of it. There needs to be data which is used to train these particular models. The data which you feed into this compute so that you can keep on fine-tuning and optimizing your models so that they can chunk out. And then very importantly also is really the human resource in terms of human resource mostly in terms of the knowledge resources, because AI is a fundamentally it's a knowledge-based field, I'd say, because like I mentioned, I think earlier in the conversation, what are some of the fundamentals of AI, which is things like matrices, vectors, and all that kind of things. So you need a whole thriving knowledge economy for you to have a thriving AI ecosystem, that kind of talent. And where is the talent generated from? From the universities, which are able to, whether that's through graduate research or undergraduate research projects and all that, people being able to actually study this and be able to advance the fields. So you see that the countries which have these things in place, that kind of infrastructure in terms of the internet and in the infrastructure in terms of having a bit of compute resources, the infrastructure, the knowledge in terms of having the institutions, the universities which are actually putting out these graduates who are skilled in this particular, competent
enough to
yes, competent enough. This is really where the ecosystem is thriving. So to really keep pushing AI in Africa, I think these are the fundamental things that you just cannot skip, in my view. Yeah.
I think that's good. It's not like we will wake up and have a vibrant ecosystem. There are things we have to strategically invest in. I saw you in Nairobi recently.
Yeah.
Could you try and give us a pragmatic analysis of how Nairobi is and how it enables a thriving artificial intelligence, let's say, startup community? You don't have to compare it to Uganda, just how it is based on those metrics.
One thing about Kenya is everything in Nairobi is fast. Everything is fast. That is from the matatus you take to the way people do business. Everything is fast and it's fast paced. We probably come from a more laxed community and all that. But when you explore different places, and I think Nairobi is a good example of it, everything is fast, everything is on time, and people are really trying to move ahead. That is really, I think, a very fundamental aspect. You look at the way the government has tried to position itself. They intentionally set out to try and make Kenya a tech haven for the African continent, like a tech hub where a lot of technology is going to actually come from that particular aspect. You see how the government actually goes out and tries to lobby these various international companies to come and set shop there. When you move in Nairobi, you're going to see there are offices for Oracle, there are offices for Microsoft, and
even Google recently. Yes, like JP Morgan
exactly.
Chase.
JP Morgan Chase is basing in Nairobi. Google has I think it's Africa AI Talent. It's also
they have a lab in Nairobi.
So this,
and I think most most VC capital
Yes.
flows to Nairobi and Kigali.
Yes,
Of course, I think Nairobi takes
Nairobi
most
takes
of the money.
a big chunk of it. So this is really what builds up an ecosystem, that you have these large players coming into the industry and showing that actually there is potential here, which is really through the favorable government policies that enable these players to actually operate in this particular market. The clarity of policy and the clarity of strategy the government has is really something very important to help and develop this, which really translates into even the startups and the ecosystem in there. You already have a lot of you already have the infrastructure which is available, whether that is through the internet and even entry of new players such as Starlink into the Kenyan market. And what does that do? It drives down the price of the internet.
Yes. That means Safaricom is not going to charge you the other high price. They're going to lower it.
Exactly.
They lower the price, right?
Exactly. They lower the price and they increase the speed of the internet. So which starts putting in place all the pillars which are necessary to build a technological ecosystem. And really that is why that market is thriving, because these things are really in place. The government policy is really in place. The infrastructure is available and they have a lot of talent. When you look at the universities around there in Kenya, a lot of them are also chunking out graduates who are actually skilled in this skilled in these technologies and the tools in which to use that. So overall, that starts growing the ecosystem. And more importantly, when you have companies trying to actually get this technology, put it out there in the real world and see the application of this technology, that is when you really get now a very booming ecosystem.
Maybe just to follow up on that, it seems like we're coming late to this party. If let's say we were to compete with China or America or countries within Europe that are really running, that I think there must be like decades ahead of us in terms of technology and specifically artificial intelligence. What would we do as African nations to even come close to catching up?
I think fundamentally, as African nations, what we need to do is investment in the key sectors that I have mentioned. Investment in infrastructure, in terms of having more people getting more people onto the internet, getting the cost of smartphones and smart devices, whether it is laptops and all that, really down, and really having also the government kind of clarity that there needs to be. The various African governments need to really have that kind of clarity and be intentional about enabling this ecosystem to really thrive. And one thing you cannot escape is the skills question. You need to be able to enable the various universities or institutions to be able to actually train these various skills, because without the skills, we'll only be users of the technology. A lot of people can use ChatGPT, but they probably cannot build the ChatGPT. It is the skills, the technical know-how, which enables you to build. And it's only through building that is when production actually happens. It is true for AI. It's true for any other industry, really. You can be a user. We use a lot of Chinese goods which really come into the country, but we're not building it. But if it is the building, the production, which can actually cause, I think, a revolution throughout the continent. So really investment in infrastructure, which it means really increasing internet connectivity, investment in things such as data centers, and then investment in the skills gap, so that you have more people really being skilled at these particular aspects and at these particular technologies, and really improving a lot on our STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I think it's something which we do not take serious enough as the African continent. When you see countries such as China, especially China is the best example, a lot of these kids are really well versed, like from childhood on. There's a huge emphasis on science and technology and mathematics from really childhood on. What are our priorities? What are the emphasis we are putting on our kids from the time they grow up? Because that is how the world advances, science and technology. So if you're not having kids starting to learn some of these concepts at a really young age on, then it's so hard for them to catch up later on. Like, when does a kid get introduced to a computer and start to program? In some countries, maybe when they're 9, when they're 8, when they're 6, young kids are getting introduced to computers and learning how to program and learning about all these tools. Now, if you get introduced to computers and programming, maybe like say it's the case for our countries, which is really much later on, maybe when you've finally gone to university, it's not really too late, but really
Yeah.
you have a lot of catching up to do
yes,
to the
yes.
rest of the world. You're not going to do it. Look at the kids who started coding at 10. It's so hard for you to start catching up with them when you started to code at maybe 25 or 20 something. So
thereabout, sure.
really, if we can fix really the education system and really emphasize that kind of skills, those STEM skills on people, I think that is really something which is fundamental. But for that to happen, this really has to be deliberate action, deliberate policy from governments, because as a private sector people, we can only do so much to bring that about, but it really has to come from the governments to help that to really happen. So I think that is how we are able to really grow into this field. And very simple examples, which I think, take example of the GPUs. These are very expensive tools. Can't the governments really have set up their own labs, maybe in the various institutions of learning, so that maybe researchers who really want to go and test out models, build their own systems and all that, can go and leverage on this. I think we are doing some of that for industry. So, for example, there are machines in some of the industrial parks. So can we also have GPU clusters in some of those industrial parks, whereby people who want to try and test out all these new technologies can actually go and they leverage these government resources.
And I think that's very important, because I think for other fields, there are more like incubation centers, right, of technology. I see it mostly with this basic manufacturing.
Yeah.
That you want to incubate your product or develop this and that. They give you that kind of support. I think that would be good. I trust that you've listened to, I think, this story from Felix Chitaka. I don't know whether he trained the GPT to speak Ruganda, but one thing is for sure, I had the machine speak Ruganda. So I wanted us to get into the concept around inclusion of African culture and languages within the broader spectrum of developing artificial intelligence that is culturally centric, but also is accessible by the last mile person, since language is a very crucial entry point or barrier for the same. What can we do as the African tech system to ensure that that crucial aspect of language is ingrained in the way AI is evolving by the day?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I like that you mentioned the example of Mr. Felix. I've tried to have a look at some of the work he has done, and I think it's really impressive for starters. And maybe it's unfortunate that some people haven't really taken it well, especially some of the responses to that. But I feel like it's really that kind of backlash of where we are trying to sabotage our own selves, which I really don't know what the purpose of that is. Because if we really try to promote our own selves and try to help people who are trying to build, I think that is something we really need to do, because building it's very hard to build anything. It's extremely hard.
It's hard.
So I respect anyone who builds. So his is really an example of what we can actually do practically. Can the people who have the knowledge to actually start to come up and see, like, can we have our own localized, I think it's called Luganda GPT.
Yeah.
Can we have our own localized version of that? Because like you mentioned really rightly, language is the entry point for a lot of people. And we have so many languages in Uganda and really Africa as a large. And many of these languages are not really there's not a lot of material around them in terms of whether that is writing and all. So I think one of the first things we really need to do is to get players, whether that is in industry, especially the private sector, because I'm a believer it's really private sector which has to drive this kind of growth, to really come and see, can we start to annotate these languages? Can we start to have content in these particular languages? Because for AI to work, you cannot ignore everything which has to happen, which is the data. You must have the data first before you use that to train the AI models. So from the onset, we need to look at the strategy. How do we capture this data? If you want people to understand the language, how can we get these languages and we train the machines so that eventually people can make use of all this? So it really starts from the data side of it, because that's what you feed into the models for them to be able to work. I like that the number of other also, I think, innovators who are doing a lot of work around that, especially in trying and maybe translate some documents from English to Luganda and really some of the more common languages around the continent. So I think that is really something which is fundamental, but it really starts from the data. How do we capture the data? And that is the data which is going to fundamentally be used and translated, be used by the AI models to do, to really make them actually make sense. So without the data, anything else we are talking is wishful thinking, because the AI model is not going to know the language.
Data.
It works on data.
Maybe just to start there, Jerry, which tribe are you from?
I am a Lubara and a Kakwa.
You are
Yes,
a Kakwa.
Lubara and Kakwa parents.
So let's say we wanted to create a Kakwa GPT. Where do we start with the data?
Where do we start with the data? One, we need to find ways how we can get that. So we can start with looking for contents which have been written by that particular in
Content
either
in Kakwa,
content in Kakwa or in Lugbara. Now, how we probably do that, if that is, we could probably look for archives of available information. However, unfortunately, just general, I don't think many of African tribes, except a few, have a lot of their history and all that recorded in documentation. So one of the things we could do is to try and,
in English.
Yes, or if it is, so we could first of all try and actually extract that data, whether that means hiring people who are native speakers to try and write context, maybe translate a book, one book from one language to another. I think the Bible has done a great job at that. There's Bibles in a lot of, most languages have a Bible and the Quran too. Get that kind of translation so that you now have, you have the data first of all, which is then used to feed the various models. Then you feed that to the model and you train your own models so that they can start recognizing this particular language. And the same thing with the speech recognition arena, really getting people to try and translate speeches. So maybe translate a speech someone gave, maybe a national address or whatever, try and translate
into
that into the Kakwa or into the Lugbar or into whatever language really you're trying to talk to, and try and feed that into the model so that it starts to understand this particular language. That will be really the entry point for a lot of these. And like I mentioned, it also goes back to the infrastructure. If people do not have devices like mobile phones, like the internet, they'll not be able to access these particular services. So, but now if you have a great population of Lubaras or Kakwas who have this particular infrastructure in place and all that, and really for any other ethnic group and all that, then these start being able to be translated, and these are they're able to start using these particular resources. But without this education, we don't have this possible. But data is really the fundamental aspect to all this. And I think for really even our part as Everpesa, one of the key offerings we are looking at is to how do we actually start helping companies in terms of translating their data and helping them to train models so that they can do very specific things for their various organizations, because companies have a lot of data which can really be very valuable, especially in terms of analysis. And
it's a lot of data. A lot. Just here at Parliament Watch, we deal with a lot of data, and it's very hard to break that data down. It would be too much content loading on the person. So you want to build a system which is interactive to the person who wants to simply access that data.
Yeah, and maybe also just to add, after you have all this data available, then you have to train it, access to the models. Now, a lot of the models, many of them, you can probably get them open source. You can get a GitHub repo which has a lot of the models, but then also the compute. Where are you going to train your models from? Training models requires a lot of computing power. This is why AI is slowly moving into the hands of only large players who have a lot of money to build up the data centers which have this compute. So that's why it goes back to what I mentioned. Can we have resources whereby the researchers who want to train their models can go and have access to some of these advanced computers from NVIDIA and all these other players in the industry, so that they can train these particular models so that it eventually then makes sense?
Yeah, because I was still following up with Felix Shitaka's confessions about the naysayers, and he was saying that it takes about like 7 million per month to simply host it on another server elsewhere to host that very Uganda GPT. It's really quite costly. It takes a toll. Maybe just lastly, before we get to your parting shots, as you think about them, at what point does the AI learn how to speak Lugbara or Ruchiga or Uganda? At what point does it start to articulate, I think, a sentence or a book, read a book or anything?
I think we are already past that point. Allow me to explain what I mean. We are past that point in terms of the technology. In terms of the technology and the compute, we have already reached the point where the AI can start to speak languages, because a ChatGPT, for example, has a version where you can actually have conversations with the model, right? You can talk to the model and it talks to you back. So the technology is already available. The question is, do we actually have the data to train the Lugbara or the Luganda version of it so that we can start talking back and forth? Which goes back to what I say, data is the fundamental the fundamental aspect of this, which we need to get right. The technology is already available. The tools are already available. The question is, are we able to actually collect the data and train our own models so that we can start having conversations in those languages? Because this is already true for the English language and maybe several other internationally spoken languages. So the only thing is, are we able to collect our own data and train the models so that we can actually also reach this particular part? So to me, I'd say that is something which is already being technological, at least technically, it's already possible. It's really now a question of, are we able to get the data and actually train the models to reach this particular aspect, and it can really translate to these localized languages.
Yeah, because I think that the future is bright. I imagine these languages which are about to grow extinct, the ones UNESCO has highlighted, if there is access to them, then it means even people who are not trained in that very language can always go and study, and I think there are so many access points. So maybe just as we pack this whole message together, do you have any parting shots for the viewers as we close the podcast?
I think what I'd like to say is I think AI presents a massive opportunity for really the African continent, and the way we exploit this opportunity is through, one, getting our data in place, getting the infrastructures we need in place, and really getting that skills gap really filled. That is really how we start. We can get those right, then we'll also be able to participate in this AI ecosystem. For as long as we do not have the skills, for as long as we do not have our data put in the right places, for as long as we do not have the infrastructure in terms of the computer and the computer and the internet to actually access these resources, it is going to be hard for the continent practically to participate in this AI revolution. But once we do that and we have the right policies in place, I think we are able to actually to compete favorably in this particular new field of arena. And AI is something which really, I think, presents a massive opportunity for humanity, and we shouldn't really miss it out, because look at the applications of AI. There are really so many, whether it's going from self-driving cars to trying to detect crop diseases, which is something very fundamental for Africa, because a lot of people are involved in
agriculture.
Involved in agriculture. Look at applications such as medical applications to try and maybe detect cancer from looking at some of the images of scans detect breast cancer from some of the images of mammogram images and all that. We are a continent which faces a lot of health challenges, but AI presents a way to actually address some of these challenges. There are only so many doctors that are available on the continent, but if we can use AI tools to try and maybe through things such as telemedication to try and maybe do a lot of more diagnosis, we can speed up the process of medical processes and all that. Look at the education sector. There's a lot of people who do not have access to top quality educational content, like we already talked about earlier. Maybe even the teachers who are teaching might not be well versed with some of the applications, but with tools such as AI, you can help train a learner. A lot of learners maybe have a bit of challenges in learning, but you can have models which are specific to a learner and really tailored for a person and all that. Look at the advances which have been made in things such as genome sequences. Look at the advances which have been made in things such as like protein folding with AlphaFold and all that. These are really huge opportunities and industries that we could tap into. But for us to be able to tap into that, we need to first of all get our data in place and really annotate it and put it in organized format. Generally, there's not a lot of data available on the African continent, but I think that is the fundamental thing we need to put in place. We need to train people so that they can be able to get the skills, and then we need to be able to give them the infrastructure so that they're able to actually apply for these various models. So I think, to me, it's really a huge opportunity that we can exploit, and it's certainly not one that we should really miss out on. And really, AI is an enabler, and it allows speed in productivity and all that. You have a lot of tools, for example, Copilot from Microsoft. It can allow you to, whether it's drafting documents, making presentations, and all these kinds of things, which is really just an amazing arena of application of AI. And I think for maybe just finally for us as Everpesa, this is really something also fundamental to us, because AI has a lot of applications in the financial field. For example, in terms of risk management and compliance, helping companies, especially in things such as detecting fraud in various transactions, helping companies in KYC. These are really all applications that we are looking at and really doing analysis, things such as credit scoring and all that. And this is something we really look at exploring and really helping companies getting their data in place so they can be able to use that to train models and really get the best and applications out of the AIs.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for your time.
Thank you so much.
We
Thank you so much for hosting
have
me.
taken a branch and a whole tree. I don't know about you, our viewer. I trust you've taken a branch and the root or any other fruit you have seen out of this conversation. We hope you learned quite a lot. Keep glued to our podcasting platforms, that is YouTube, at the Center for Policy Analysis, Podbean still Center for Policy Analysis. Remember, we release an episode each week. The trailer comes out on Monday and the podcast comes out on Tuesday. And we look forward to working with you on this journey of curating stories of African leaders that are shaping the futures of their communities. It was good having you. My name is Joseph.
The Center for Policy Analysis is an independent think tank shaping parliamentary democracy, governance, and public policy in Uganda and beyond. Our mission is to shape public policy and strengthen democratic governance by delivering high-quality research, fostering collaboration, and empowering citizens. Our vision is a democratic society with transparent, accountable, and responsive governance systems. What sets SEPA apart? A unique consortium model that integrates expertise from diverse partners for multidisciplinary approaches. We pioneer thought leadership, leveraging tools like artificial intelligence to enhance impact. Through collaborative advocacy, we empower stakeholders to engage with legislative processes, all while combining rigorous research with a deep understanding of Uganda's political economy. Our flagship initiatives include Parliament Watch Uganda, that bridges the gap between citizens and Parliament, the Policy Digest podcast that explores politics and public affairs across Africa, and the SEPA Convo, our bi-monthly X-Space tackling key public issues. Our work spans parliamentary democracy, human rights, public health, road safety, climate justice, artificial intelligence, and more, including the Africa Regional Conference on Parliament and Legislation. Join SEPA in shaping policies, amplifying voices, and building a democratic future. Visit www.sepa.or.ug to learn more or follow us on social media. The Center for Policy Analysis, a leading public policy think tank. Thank you for listening to the Policy Digest, a Center for Policy Analysis podcast that explores how African societies are governed and how people and their leaders are shaping the future of their communities. For more podcasts, check out our Podbean and YouTube platforms. Thank you.